A quick housekeeping item before we start the show today, folks. We're focusing on supporting the show primarily through listener support this year. It's my view that listener-supported programming is critical to the overall media landscape. It keeps content independence intact, and it creates a richer and more vibrant cultural ecosystem. So if you get any value at all from what we're creating here at the Together Show, please subscribe on our website, together.show. Subscribers at any level get bonus clips, many unedited interviews, early access to certain of our episodes, and a community of other listeners. So thank you. Now, on to the show.
I want to know you. I want to know the parts of you that you were afraid to show me. I want to know the parts of you that you're embarrassed about. The parts of you that you're terrified to show me. And I'll show you those parts, and let's see what we look like.
I'm Eric Newton, and this is Together, the podcast where we explore the truth about human relationships. As a divorce lawyer, I saw thousands of couples break up firsthand. These days, I'm not so interested in breaking couples up, nor in keeping them together. I'm interested in what our relationships can teach us about ourselves and the world that we live in. So on this show, we have honest conversations with real people about real relationships. I was a guest on another podcast last week. It's called Dateable, and I'll let you know when it comes out. But anyway, the hosts wanted to know what works and what doesn't work in the relationship world, and I kept finding myself saying things like, well, let's not kid ourselves. Sometimes you're going to wonder why you're dating this person, which is absolutely true. I stand by that 100%. But after the 10th time of hearing myself saying, let's not kid ourselves, I began to wonder if I've just become a grumpy old man after all these divorces and couple interviews. Well, maybe I have become a grumpy old man because the theme of today's episode is more of my unique brand of relationship realism. Sometimes, no matter how much you may love the person you're with, you're gonna hate them. Now, I know we're not supposed to use that word in our culture, and I've got a much longer explanation for my thinking on the topic of hate in our magazine, so if you want to read all about it, I'll post a link in our show notes. But the essence is that the feelings are going to happen, so we need to shift our perspective about them. This experience that sometimes bubbles up into this feeling that we refer to as hate is just trying to express something. It's articulating an unfulfilled need. There are certainly tools to manage the feeling and to use it productively and to limit the suffering that it causes. But the uncomfortable sensations, those are always going to arise. Which brings us to our guests today, Michael and Sara. Michael is a Canadian living in Mexico. He's an author with several published works that I'll link in our show notes, one of which is about the experiences that he shares in our interview today. Sara is from Mexico, and the two met in Puerto Vallarta, where they're living now. Now, these two split up for a time when Sara was pregnant with their daughter. And the reason for the split and what came out of that split is the essence of our episode today. I'll let them tell the story. Now, as a footnote, in this interview, you'll hear from Michael a lot more than Sara, and I mention that because I don't want to give the impression that he dominated the conversation. The entire recording was actually quite balanced. If you'd like to hear more from Sara, I'll be posting clips of her for our subscribers. And if you want to hear those, you can find links to supporting us and becoming a member on our website, which is together.show. Now, we're joining the story just as Sara is explaining why they split up. So here we go. Okay, so I think this breakup that the two of you experienced later on seems really central and critical to your personal development, individually and as a couple. So, and Michael, I promise we'll get to you in a minute here. But Sara, can you explain what led up to that breakup and how it happened?
Okay, so there's this crazy thing that I almost on a regular basis I had this neurosis where I would look at Mike and think, did I choose the right man? What am I doing here? This doesn't feel right. Should I get divorced, or I would have fantasies of being divorced, but I wouldn't talk about it.
Oh,
Well,
I'm so glad that you're saying that out loud. Everybody goes through that.
yeah,
The best and the worst relationships, everybody has that internal dialogue, but nobody really knows how to healthfully deal with it.
yeah, it's hard.
So, okay, I interrupted you. What
Yeah,
happened?
so I wouldn't talk about it. So that created two things. Now I know it created two things, but by then I could only see what created inside of me, which was just this profound, essential disconnection from Mike. And so, as a consequence of that too, I would start lying. For instance, are you happy with me? I'm awesome. This is great. Maybe small things like that. And
Yeah.
the other thing that caused that I now know is that Mike was growing to feel more and more unsafe with me because he
Right.
could see gestures, tones of voice. He could sense, in his skin that disconnection. And so that made him so triggered. And then he would be afraid, that I was maybe like I had an agenda or I was lying, which I was indeed. And
Yeah.
so it was this horrendous circle of I trigger you and you trigger me. And so I think I should leave you and you think I should leave you.
It's such a fascinating circle because really you were lying to yourself and to
Yeah.
him because you wanted to be safe.
Yeah.
On some level, you wanted the relationship to continue, even though it wasn't operating on a level of integrity.
That's right.
And so you were making up these lies, but in fact, those lies were making things worse because, of course, he picked up on them.
Yeah. That's right. And
So I wonder what were you telling yourself internally, given that on one hand you had identified that he was your man, that after this the race was over and this is where you were going to park, that he was your perfect partner, and on the other hand you were having these internal questions and fantasies about divorce because he made you so upset. How did your brain reconcile those two things?
that's a wonderful question. Well, it was like it was just as complicated precisely as a relationship with a mother. It's like I love you but I
Yeah.
hate you, and so I totally want to be with you, but please go away. So I
And we didn't
think
have that.
we 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 had wonderful moments, where I was so in love with them and it felt awesome, and I think those moments kept me going. But then we had like a stressful scenario or tension or a fight, and then I was completely triggered, and I was like, I'm so unsafe, I'm so scared. Who is he? I don't want to be with him. And this whole fantasy that if I wasn't with him, I would be so happy.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, Sarah, this is so powerful. Okay, so I keep interrupting you. What happened then?
So, eventually, around Christmas 2015, I guess we were both reaching a point of like maximum tension and unsafety. And for a couple or a few days, I noticed that Mike did one same gesture, which was throwing something near me. And in the beginning, it didn't feel important. It was just like, well, he's angry. But then, I don't know, maybe he did it like 4 or 5 times. And so I noticed the pattern. And that started in my brain this panic, like, okay, he's been throwing things around me. I'm scared that he's gonna do something to me. And I remember that I was subscribed to this newsletter for pregnant women. And after we had had a huge, sad, horrible fight, I received, it was a Sunday, I think, or a Monday, I received the newsletter and I opened it, and it was precisely about violence in the couple or in the family. And so that was like another trigger, that kind of fed my panic. And I got to the conclusion that I was at risk, that Mike was potentially dangerous, and that I had to leave. And so I ran away.
It was very surprising for me when she left. It seems in retrospect that we were really traveling on parallel tracks, but we really weren't seeing the same world. Her experience of our relationship, my experience of our relationship, it wasn't exactly the same. But what was very clear to me was, I come from a background of no limits, of course. And of course, I would gravitate towards an imago therapist eventually, or a counselor. So in my upbringing, like in my childhood home, basically the only way that limits were established was screaming, your needs or your necessities to the person who wasn't respecting them. So I didn't really, like, Sara either wouldn't put up limits or they would be really subtle, and our communications would be really subtle, and it wasn't really obvious for me, and so I would just roll over her limits, and that was it. Like what she was saying as far as me throwing things, like I didn't even think twice about it, but in retrospect I was like, I was such an asshole, and it wasn't, I didn't even consider for a second while I was, in those particular times, most of them, we weren't even having something between us. There was something with like an insurance claim and whatever it was, and I didn't realize that what I was doing was totally making her feel terrified. I ended up speaking to this guy whose name is Al Turtle, who's remarkable, who I found actually online, and it was kind of earth-shattering for me. It was really, like, I just all of a sudden could see certain things with a lot more clarity, and I could see kind of my behaviors from a more objective point of view, which of course he kind of put in my face in not a gentle way. And so what he worked with me and what I worked on internally was being able to shut up, and being able to ask questions and listen, and realize that I found myself in a situation where I was with someone who took years to express things, and I had, I was resentful and I was angry because I thought these things, I was reading the list, right, this really long list, and I'm thinking, my God, some of these things would have been so easy to have engaged and so simple to have talked about, and it might have taken us a couple of weeks, or maybe the worst ones a couple of months, or maybe some of them we wouldn't have been able to deal with, but it became this monster, this mountain of stuff that it wasn't engaged, and so there was we kind of had this relationship where either we were happy together or it was falling apart, and there was no room to dislike each other, and there was no room for anger, and there was no room for needing solitude. So how do I be in a way that I'm being respectful, that I'm being attentive, I'm listening, I'm being compassionate, and what I realized, actually the word that Al Turtle used was, he said, he defines it as a narcissist prick. And a narcissist prick, according to him, is someone who threatens, to have a tantrum or to get angry if they don't get what they want, and basically just talks and doesn't listen very well, right? And so he kind of explained this term to me, and I realized I had a lot of these attributes. I didn't have good listening skills within my marriage. And as a result, I was totally out of tune to her needs and her limits. And so the first like basic primordial step was to learn to listen. So I would just, she writes me this 8-page letter that normally, and it triggered the hell out of me. But normally I would be like, la, 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 and defending myself and explaining stuff. And the answer that I gave was, thank you. And unfortunately, she didn't know, she thought I was joking. Like it was so kind of out of character. She thought either I was joking or I was mocking her. And it took a long time for us to kind of find middle ground and be able to communicate after that. But what I was learning to do was just to receive her, and to receive what she was trying to communicate, so that we can start with the conversation that should have been happening for years.
The thing that you needed to do to grow was the thing that you needed to do to make her feel safe, and vice versa.
And the thing that I most feared, right, which was where we would trigger each other, because I had, all sorts of abandonment issues, and she, of course, would run away, right? So she would want to run away, and I would want to follow her. And she would want to get away, and I'd want to follow her. So, and then she left and actually literally abandoned me, right? And so it was like my biggest fear, and what I was fearing many times in conflicts, all of a sudden materialized. So it was like, right. Here it is, it's going to wash all over you, and you're going to, I just had to engage that head on. It wasn't a fear, right? It was just, this is what's happening. Let's figure out where I am and what's going on here, and who I am.
Once that potential that triggered so much fear and anxiety became the truth, was the notion of fear gone in that moment, and then it was just activity, or how did it sounds like it became a little bit more peaceful for you in a way.
Oh no, I'd be lying. I mean, in retrospect, yeah, it's easier to look at it, but I could tell you that there was just so much pain, and there was so much there was such a good part of each day that was just spent crying or shaking or feeling horrendous, or just so I wouldn't call it peaceful. I would call it, eventually, once I kind of unpacked it, right, there was a little more peace. But it was just, like, to put it succinctly, I was in the worst place I'd ever been, and I figured that I wouldn't have the courage to get there on my own. So I figured that was a great place to work from. And that was it. And so I figured, I'm not going to, I made one commitment to myself, and that was it at that time. And that was to feel everything that came up, regardless of what it felt like, to just be genuine in that moment. Because I figured that it was kind of a lack of sincerity and a lack of honesty that kind of brought that on some level. And so I figured, I can't walk out of this place the same way I walked in.
Is this what you were taking with you when you went to Sarah's mom's house and met her at the door there?
It sounds nice. I think more honestly, I showed up naked, and I showed up I just took me, and I took a much more raw, honest version of me to her, and wanted to experience, it was almost like, I felt like I was starving, and I felt like I felt like I got ripped off, and I felt like I'd spent years with kind of someone that wasn't themselves, and I was so starving, I loved her, and I wanted to experience her. I wanted to experience her the way she wanted to experience her, and the way that she was. And I felt like we had like no mile. We had all these miles on the vehicle, right? That was like our relationship, and they weren't really genuine. Like, they were there, but they weren't full. And I was so interested in actually having experiences with her where she felt like her and I felt like me, and we could start building something based on that. I felt like we were at zero there. And so I was like, okay, I want to know you. I want to know the parts of you that you were afraid to show me. I want to know the parts of you that you're embarrassed about, the parts of you that you're terrified to show me. And I'll show you those parts, and let's see what we look like.
There's this temptation for couples to think, oh, now we're fixed.
Oh.
We did the therapy, or we did the relationship course, or we had a conversation after that big fight and we feel really good now, and everything's fine now, everything's good. But in my experience, that's a fallacy, and it's a dangerous one, that there's no fixedness. in a cosmic sense, perhaps no brokenness either, but there's no state in a relationship of everything is now done. You're not in ongoing therapy with anybody, but how have you carried forward the work that must be ongoing?
I think with love and with my relationship with Sara, either we're evolving and we're getting closer and we're understanding each other better, or there's almost like this natural decay that happens, and I don't know why it happens or the intricacies of it, but I've seen it. And so what I've seen is if we're not kind of actively in touch with each other, actively listening to each other, actively kind of working on ourselves, on our relationship, we start, it's almost like relapsing. And I don't know why, but it seems to be the case. Like it just, I think love is this it's an active verb that needs a constant investment of energy and will and determination and caring and compassion.
I couldn't agree more. I think love has to be an active verb. That said, I can imagine somebody listening to this and saying, oh my God, that just sounds like such toil.
You know what? I think, I made a video about this once, about the myth of happily ever after and how I feel like it perpetuates divorces and it perpetuates failed marriages because people think that love is this stagnant, fixed thing that if you have it, it'll take care of everything for you. And it's so far from the case. It's just not the case. And I mean, I think life is hard and work intensive, and I think it's worth it. And I think that, like, to put it simply, it's really nice to know that someone cares about me on a regular basis, and it's really nice for me to show Sara that she means a lot to me. And that's not like toil, it's an effort. It's an active investment, right? But the benefits from it are I mean, they're enormous, and it's like, where would you put your effort if not into the person that is the most important person in your life, who you share the most amount of time with besides yourself? Why wouldn't you?
Amen.
Why wouldn't you have that be an amazing place to be?
It might sound silly, but I think one of the things that I hate the most about fighting is the shame that comes after, Like, oh, I'm so sorry I said that. I'm so sorry I screamed. I didn't mean that. And it seems such an absurd exercise, of saying hurtful things and then regretting them. And even worse, because you can't go back, you can't erase them. But I think it's very important to kind of, it might sound cynical, but to kind of lose expectation. I think once upon a time I used to believe in a future with no pain, or with perfection, or where we weren't going to have stuff, or and now it's more like I think I'm going to dislike him every now and then forever,
There's a certain amount of conflict that comes from the intimacy of it all, I think. And to be able to have that without it being, in my case, because I have at least I used to carry the abandonment stuff, that it's like, okay, she's angry with me, but she's not going to run away. Or she's pissed off at me, but it doesn't mean that she's leaving me, or that she doesn't want to be in the relationship, or that, I need to be in some sort of nervous state. That something is threatened. Then it's, this idea that I think you had a couple in one of your podcasts that talked about, the comfort of knowing that it's not the end of the world, and everything isn't coming to an end just because there's a fight, just because there's a disagreement. And I think, at least with us, it took a really long time to kind of let go of that. This kind of perfectionist dream of some ideal marriage that we were both holding in our own respective universes of what that's supposed to look like. I don't know, like I like getting dirty. I don't know, I think it means we're living. I think it means we're we're actually being ourselves, because I wouldn't in a million years profess to be some sort of a perfect, clean individual. I have all sorts of edges, and I'm complicated, and I could be crabby, and I could be a pain in the butt, and so it's so crazy for me to imagine that, she should be perfect.
How would you describe what the relationship is like now after that entire experience?
Well, I think being in this marriage for me is more relaxing. I feel much more stable. It's quite an experience to have so much intimacy with someone, to feel so much, to feel so loved and to love so much. And so in general, I for sure would say that I am very happy, and I'm excited because one idea that Mike had recently to navigate our differences is that we should talk out loud about the voices that we have in our heads that kind of hate the other person. And for instance, yesterday, we were going to do some work together. We took the baby to a place where they were going to take care of her. And it seemed to me like Mike was in a bad mood. So as soon as we were on our own, I said to him, I hate you because I think you're in a bad mood. And I was trying to be playful and kind of go along with that thing of just say the voice out loud, even though I didn't hate him, and it wasn't that important really. And it wasn't very smooth, Mike didn't receive it the way that I wanted to send it, so to speak.
Well, hold on. That story is so amazing because the question I was going to ask you was how do you know that you can say those? How do you know you can give voice to those internal dialogues in a way that's not going to cause a breakup or in a way that's not dangerous? And then you just told me a story about how actually you did it and it didn't even work at all.
It did work, but just to interject, it did take us where we wanted, but it was kind of like, before we had done it in a kind of controlled environment where we're like, okay, let's do this. And it wasn't really like an open forum, let's do this from now on all the time, right? And so in that case, she just kind of did it. And I was like, it triggered me horrendously because she was like, I hate you and I think you're in a bad mood. And I didn't think I was even in a bad mood. So I was like, I don't know what the hell to do with this, right? And so it was like, it was great though, because it created a tremendous intimacy. Like we ended up getting somewhere great, but it was clunky. I'd say, at least it wasn't
I
smooth.
think what I should have said, I guess, was I hate you because I'm feeling unsafe because I think you're in a bad mood, and kind of have my unsafety be important, so maybe some compassion could be triggered.
I love how you're saying that you should have taken responsibility for your own experience there.
Exactly.
I wonder too, though, Mike, what if she had said, okay, I'm going to do the voice thing now, and then it came out totally messy. Let's say she said, I'm going to do the voice thing now, but then she said it without taking any responsibility. Would that preface have made a difference for you?
So. Because those, I mean, let's be honest. I mean, those voices in our heads they're very direct and they're not exactly compassionate, if we're in a conflict. And so it's to be expected, right? It just caught me so off guard because I thought, why you hate me for a bad mood that I don't even think I'm in, right? And it seemed so like kind of projecting it onto me. And so what we ended up getting to was that what she was talking about, where it was kind of her owning it, right? And her saying, this is coming from me, right? And not from you. Even inside of conflicts and where I really might hate Sara, and I don't want to be with her, I don't want to look at her, not that I don't want to be with her in a relationship, but just in that moment, she's trying so hard and she's showing up, and there's something in our relationship that I don't think we've ever had before, where we're both investing so much, and there's so much kind of common ground of, we want this to be, home.
Michael has written several very touching books about what he learned going through this process with Sara. He wanted to provide a resource for people experiencing the same challenges that the two of them did. And I have to say, I think he's done so very elegantly. These books are worth checking out, and I'll link them in our show notes for you. And Michael also introduced me to Al Turtle, the therapist that he mentions in our interview. Now, I had a call with Al that turned into a full-blown interview, most of which I actually managed to record. He's a fascinating guy. He's worked with over 3,000 couples, and he has a lot to say on the issues that we all face. Now, I'm not going to spoil his theories by summarizing them here. Instead, I'll post that interview probably next week, so stay tuned.